Hey everybody, welcome back. This is your host Mitchell from Notorious Radio 718, and we have a really exciting UFC Fight Night, October 15th, 7 p.m. in Vegas at the Apex Arena. And to start off, we have a 5-round fight with our ladies, Alexa Grasso, the 5th ranked flyweight in the UFC, versus Viviane Araújo, the 6th ranked flyweight in the UFC. So let's get started and let's go break down this fight. Alexa Grasso is on a 3-fight win streak. Her last recent fight was with Joanne Wood. She had a rear naked choke. She beat Macy Barber by unanimous decision, and she beat Ji Yeon Kim. The fight before, she lost to the current champion, who's Carla Esparza, and the fight before, she had a one against Carolina Kolakowicz. Her opponent, Viviane Araújo from Brazil, had a last win against Andrea Lee. The fight before, she lost to Caitlin Chikugian, and she had a win over Roxanne Metafari and Montana De La Rosa, and she lost to Jessica Evil Eye. The odds for this fight is we have Alexa Grasso as a heavy minus 215 favorite, and we have Viviane Araújo as the underdog at plus 185. For our pick for Notorious Radio, we're going to have to stay with our Mexican fighter in Alexa Grasso. I just really like what I've been watching from her in her last 3 fights. She's been super, super consistent. Her game is very well rounded. And I do believe that this fight is going to help like clear some of the smoke on who's going to be in line to fight for the flyweight title later on, which you obviously know is going to be happening at UFC MSG against Carla Esparza and Zhao Wei Ling. So these ladies get a nice main event. You always know I love when the UFC lets the ladies headline. I think they deserve all the respect, just like any person who enters the ring. And I applaud them that they're getting a main event and they get to show their talent Saturday night, October 15th at 7 p.m. So that's going to be a fantastic, fantastic main event. And guys, tune in. And Notorious Radio, we're going with the favorite, Alexa Grasso, the number 5th ranked UFC flyweight. For the co-main event, it's a super interesting match. We have Cub Swanson, which you guys all know is going to be a future UFC Hall of Famer, immense veteran from California, training out of Sacramento, record 28 and 12, and he is a heavy underdog at plus 175. His last win was against Darren Elkins. He took a really, really big step up in competition and he lost to Giga Chikazde. The fight before that, he won against Daniel Pineda. And he also, what kind of started his nice little win streak is when he beat Kron Gracie and he put on a spectacular performance against the legend of the Gracie family. What makes this bout so interesting is that Cub Swanson has always fought at featherweight, and he's actually making his bantamweight debut. And I could understand why the matchmakers have him as such a underdog is because I'm also kind of worried about that weight cut. As a veteran who's fought over 40 times at 145 to making his debut at bantamweight towards the end of his career is something that I am truly worried, and I think it might be very draining. Even though, as you know, Jose Aldo essentially did the same thing. His whole career was in the featherweight division, and his last 4 to 5 fights, he actually finished his career in the bantamweight division, which his last fight he lost to Merab Dishishvili, which was a beautiful send-off fight at the in Utah at the O2 Arena. His opponent is a very scrappy bantamweight in Jonathan Martinez, who's the favorite at a minus 205. He's fighting out of Factory X, which is a very, very good camp in Denver. He's 15 and 4. He is also on a 3-fight win streak. His last wins were against Vince Morales, Alejandro Perez, and Ziviad Lashashvili. He also lost by KO to Davy Grant, and the following win he won against Thomas Almeida. I do believe that I'm going to have to rock with Jonathan Martinez. even though a lot of people are going to be riding with Cub Swanson, my biggest concern is this weight cut. I do believe towards the end of his career, to be making that extra 5 kilos to come down to bantamweight, even though he might believe he'll be getting the advantage as the bigger fighter, I do believe this will be physically a lot on his body and health, and I do believe it will gas him out if this fight makes it out of the first to second round. I don't believe his stamina will hold up because the weight cut will be so detrimental, and that's why Notorious Radio is going to have to be rocking with Jonathan Martinez at minus 205. We believe he's a very natural bantamweight. This is an easy cut for him, and he's very strong, and he's a very, very crafty finisher. So really keep an eye out on this co-main event against Jonathan Martinez and the legend Cub Swanson, which is a fantastic, fantastic. I possibly do believe this might be Cub Swanson's last UFC fight. For some reason, I feel like he has had a fantastic career in the UFC, has mentored tons of fighters, and a lot of people look up to him and what he's done for the sport. By him going down to bantamweight just proves that the fighters are continuing to evolve, the science is getting better, and they're understanding their bodies and nutrition to levels that before that they could not accomplish. And obviously, cutting weight, making weight is a sport in itself. So I cannot wait to see when they make weight on Friday and how that goes and how both fighters look at the scales. The next match we have is a really, really exciting flyweight match. We have a very, very dominant flyweight in Askar Askarov. He is a fantastic fighter who's literally been on a 13 fight win streak until his last loss was to Kai Kara France. Otherwise, he's been on an absolute tear running through Joseph Benavidez, Alexandre Pantoja, Tim Elliott, and he even had a draw with former champion Brandon Moreno. His opponent, Brandon Royval, 14-6, is coming in on the underdog at a plus 200. He's on a 2 fight winning streak. He beat Matt Schnell by guillotine. He also had a winner versus Rogerio Bonatorin. He lost to Alexandra Pantoja, which obviously you see Askar Askarov beat, and he also lost to Brandon Moreno by TKO. But the interesting is that Brandon Royval actually beat Kai Kara France, who Askar Askarov lost to. So I could understand why this fight makes sense. But even though Brandon Royval previously beat Kai Kara France, I do believe Kai Kara France, since that loss, has evolved and went on his own little run in the flyweight division where he recently got stopped by Brandon Moreno. And as you can see, the flyweight division is kind of all running through itself like on a hamster wheel. But Notorious Radio is still going to have to take our favorite in Askar Askarov. 14-1-1. He's at the heavy favorite at a minus 240, and I just cannot go against this guy. He is so talented. I just truly believe his game is evolving and he is getting better. He is extremely talented, extremely crafty, amazing wrestling background, great striking, and just I do believe he's going to be a fan favorite going forward just with his fighting style. And whoever thought that the flyweight division was going to get eliminated, I am so thankful that at that time Henry Cejudo beat TJ Dillashaw, who tried to actually eliminate the flyweight division. And as you can see, there is so many exciting fighters coming out of the flyweight division, and I am so happy that the UFC kept this division and the fans are getting to enjoy it because in my opinion, the more weight classes, the more opportunities for fighters to enter, and the more fights that we can see live through the promotion, which I think is fantastic for the fans and for the fighters who actually can make 125, whereas 135 and 145 is obviously just too much for them. Size obviously takes them out, and this division is continuing to grow and blossom, and I'm excited. They're obviously having the fourth fight against Davis and Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno. So you obviously see there is a huge demand in the flyweight division, even though this will be the fourth time these guys face each other. This rarely, I think this, I'm not sure if this ever happened in the UFC where the fighters are actually met for the fourth time. I know we've had lots of trilogies that have been happening over time, but for the fighters to meet for the fourth time is honestly a new experience for me and the fans, and we're excited to see that, and I'm excited to continue to watch the flyweight division flourish in the UFC. So very thankful for that. Our next match is in the middleweight division, and we have two sluggers. We have a guy, Jordan Wright, 12-3, who's obviously he's 2-3 in his last five fights. He's an underdog at a plus 165, and what makes him a little bit special, he's kind of like fight or flight. He never really leaves the first round. So he's either going to finish you or he gets finished. That's kind of been his style. But his opponents have been very high level, and he lost to Marc Andre by guillotine. He also lost to Bruno Silva, who fought Alex Pereira, and he lost to him by TKO. He had a win over Jamie Pickett. He also got knocked out by Joaquin Buckley, and his UFC debut, he had a win against Ike Villanueva by TKO. His opponent is Dusko Tudorvich. He's a Serbian middleweight who had a nice little run. He came out of Dana White's Contender Series. But his last fight, he lost by a vicious elbow to Chidi Bang Bang, which I had a feeling that Chidi was going to take him out, and he did, and he knocked him out by KO by elbow. His fight before, he beat a nice little UFC veteran who puts up good fights. His name is Maki Pitolo. He won him by TKO. But then his other two fights, he lost. So these guys are both in the kind of a slump where they can't actually pull together a string of wins. So the UFC decided to let these guys face each other and see who's going to come out on top and whose career is going to kind of get shifted into the burner and who's going to try to get more exciting fights going forward. So obviously Dusko lost to Gregory Rodriguez, who just obviously we did a whole episode on fighter safety, how he had that really nasty cut in between his eyes, and he lost to a really exciting fighter also in Puya Soriano by TKO, who also fights out of Vegas at Extreme Couture. These two middleweights are all or nothing. It's most likely not going to make it out of the first, second round. And I'm gonna have to honestly rock with my guy Dusko Tudorvich on this fight. I do believe he is a little bit more experienced. He's a young fighter who's continuing to grow, and he's kind of in a tough little position where he really needs this win or he's gonna lose massive momentum because he came into the UFC with a lot of expectations, and obviously the UFC talent of caliber that they provided him has humbled him. And it's to show that the regional scene where he was able to dominate prior is not the same that when you fight in the UFC. There's really no easy fights that are given in the promotion. So obviously giving him Jordan Wright is not going to be easy fight whatsoever, but I do believe this is a very winnable fight for him. And for that reason, I'm going to rock with Dusko that night. For the opening match in the main event will be a very nice light heavyweight match. So we have our really good seasoned veteran in Mishra Sirkanov. He's 15-8. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he fights out of Extreme Couture. The problem is Mishra is on a three-fight losing streak. And everyone who understands the UFC, when you lose three fights in a row, you usually get kicked out of the promotion or you get kind of like that final shot before they really have to decide what they want to do with you. So he lost to Welling Thurman, he lost to Christoph Jocko, he lost to Ryan Spann. He did have a very impressive win against Jimmy Crute where he hit him with a Peruvian necktie. And then you obviously know, everyone knows that loss to Johnny Walker where he had that flying knee. His opponent is also another really exciting light heavyweight, which I truly enjoy watching, and that's Alonso Manifold. His last fight, he beat that Ukrainian hype train in in Oscar, where he just knocked them out in the first round, where a lot of people thought this guy from Ukraine was going to come into the UFC in the light heavyweight division and just thought he's going to make a lot of noise. He got quickly humbled, and from what I was told, his whole record was kind of like fluffed and made up, and the UFC actually dropped him. The fight before he lost to William Knight, he beat Ed Herman. He also had a win against Fabio Cherant. He lost to OSP by KO, and he also lost to Devin Clark. So what I'm seeing from Alonso Manifold, anytime he gets competition that's a severely step up, it actually like hurts him because OSP, Devin Clark, these are very good veterans in the light heavyweight division, and they obviously have been able to stop him. And I kind of believe that I'm going to have to stick with the underdog in Mishra. I know that he's in a 3-fight losing streak, but he's a very, very crafty person on the ground. And I do believe that I know Alonso Manifold does have that knockout power, and his wrestling has been much, much better, and he's been working on his stamina. But I do believe that Mishra's going to come out with the win, and I'm going to have to rock with the underdog on the opening fight. He's at a plus 175. We have Alonso at a minus 25, and I just have a gut feeling that the 3-fight losing streak will end for Mishra on October 15th, and we're hoping that Mishra does well and gets to remain in the UFC and puts on a spectacular performance. Another really key matchup I want to talk about in the prelims. This is one of the most exciting fights in the prelims for me, in my opinion. It's a guy from Nate Diaz's camp, and his name is Nick Maximoff. He obviously had a beautiful start in the Dana White's Contender Series. He had a win over Cody Brundage. He had another really tough win over Puna Soriano, but he lost in the first round to this guy Andre Petrovsky, who was also on the Ultimate Fighter. And the reason I want to mention that loss is because he was the biggest favorite on that night, on that card, versus Andre Petrovsky. And Petrovsky actually finished Nick Maximoff, who has an insane grappling jiu-jitsu background because he's training with Gracie and Nick and Nate Diaz, and he beat him by an anaconda choke, and he put him to sleep. So by him doing that, that was really, really impressive because this guy has a lot of hype behind him, and he's going against another slugger in the middleweight division in Jacob Malkoun. Jacob Malkoun is actually a very good friend with Israel Adesanya. He's 6-2, and he's an underdog at plus 120. His last loss was to Brendan Allen. He had a win over AJ Dobson. He put over a beautiful win over Abdul Al Hassan, and his opening debut was against a really tough middleweight in Phil Hawes, which he got knocked out. So really keep an eye out on this middleweight match. I'm going to rock with Nick Maximoff at a minus 140 for that fight. I do believe this kid is super talented, and I do believe that loss is going to actually help him grow and kind of shake off like that kind of trying like holding on to an undefeated record sometimes for a fighter just puts this immense amount of pressure to show up, and I do believe sometimes after the loss they become more understanding that it's okay to lose and to grow and to get better. So I do believe Nick will shine that night, and we will see a lot of his skills be brought into the octagon. And guys, always remember that card is going to be October 15 at 7 p.m. at the UFC Apex. And if you love the merch that we've been producing and you got watch it on my podcast, it's on notoriouspulls.com. Follow it. We have amazing merchandise for sale and gear. It's awesome. And remember to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and all social media platforms. And remember, and if ain't notorious, I don't want it. This is your host, Mitchell from Notorious Radio 718, and we'll see you soon.